You want to learn about the best setup for bird photography and also learn some tips and tricks along the way? Don't go anywhere. Hey everyone, it's Rylan with Rylan's Amazing Photography, and like I said, today I'm going to be talking about my bird photography setup, and I'm also going to be giving some tips and tricks to you all to help improve your bird photography. Now, bird photography is no easy task, so even with the tips that I'm giving you, and even with the gear I'm going to be talking about, that's not going to make you great at photographing birds all on its own. At the end of the day, practice makes perfect. But before I get into talking about my gear and talking about some tips that will help you, I want to thank today's sponsor of the video, which is me. I just released my brand new book titled To You From Me, and it is truly the best thing that I think I've ever did in my career. There are so many beautiful pictures of wildlife, landscapes, beautiful photos of the moon in all of its phases, and you don't want to miss it. There's pictures from around the entire world in that book, and it would just mean so much to me if you would go check it out. It is only $30.99 on Amazon, and it's free shipping, so it's a great purchase, great read, and if you're interested in checking it out or getting more information about it, you can go down below to the description or just check out the pinned comment. Well, now that brand endorsement is out of the way and I've promoted my new book, which is fantastic, let's start talking about the gear that I use for bird photography. So I'm going to start with my camera body, which is the Nikon Z9, and let me tell you, this thing is an absolute beast. The thing can shoot 120 frames per second. Of course that's not raw, but it can do 20 frames a second raw, and I mean, the file quality is just astronomically impressive. I have zero complaints. I don't even know how many megapixels it has, because honestly, megapixels don't really matter that much. I think it's around like 45 megapixels maybe, but I'm not even sure because I don't care because it's so great. Autofocus is extremely important when it comes to bird photography or any sort of photography when you have a moving subject, and the autofocus in this camera is phenomenal. I pretty much use 3D tracking when I'm photographing birds, which is in autofocus continuous mode. Every now and then the 3D tracking isn't going to work best, and if it doesn't, it's usually when I'm dealing with smaller birds like songbirds and you know, birds that aren't huge, or if I'm far away from a bird, 3D tracking doesn't work great either, which is okay. It's no big deal because I just switched to single point focus, which allows me to, you know, go in and it's a really small point and I can just move it to wherever I want it to be. And as long as you keep it in autofocus continuous, if your finger is pressing half down on the shutter or pressing the AF on button, you're still going to be fine, and it's going to be focusing constantly even though it's not necessarily in 3D tracking mode. So honestly, the Nikon Z9 is phenomenal. It's got to be the best camera that Nikon has out on the market right now for bird and wildlife photography. I mean, there's just nothing that can compete with it except the Nikon Z8, which is brand new. I've not had my hands on it yet, but apparently it's basically a Nikon Z9 in a smaller body, which means it's gonna be a great camera. But I do personally, I like the larger body for photography. I like having that built-in vertical grip. I use it quite a bit. I shoot in portrait orientation quite a bit, not just for portraits, but I take photos for social media, which requires me posting on Instagram stories, Facebook stories, TikTok, and all of those you're gonna get the best results in portrait orientation. So I use the vertical grip on my Z9 a lot. A lot of people don't like a vertical grip because they say it makes it more difficult to travel with and it's heavier. I can't tell a big difference, honestly. I travel all the time with my camera, including it being in bags and going through airport security and going on and off of planes. It doesn't make a huge difference between this camera and my old Nikon D500, which didn't have a vertical grip. So I'm very pro Nikon Z9, and I am telling you, it's got to be top 3 mirrorless cameras on the market for bird photography, in my personal opinion. And that's not just Nikon, that's like Sony, Canon, Fujifilm. It's got to be top 3 when it comes to bird photography. So I highly recommend the Nikon Z9 if you can afford it. So moving on from the Z9, unfortunately I don't have my hands on Z telephoto lens yet. I'm really hoping to get my hands on a Nikon Z800mm f6.3 really soon. I'm dying to have that lens, but it's even more expensive than the Z9. So I'm still saving up. So if you go buy my book, or, you know, if you watch this whole video, that helps me out on its own. So make sure you do that. But since I don't have a Z lens yet, I am currently using the Nikon F to Z adapter 2. I use the 2nd gen because that's just what Nikon heavily promoted to go with the Z9. And it's smaller than the F to Z1 adapter, which I believe actually has a tripod mount on it, built onto the lens adapter. And I definitely wouldn't like that because, I don't know, I like the adapter to be small, especially if I'm using other F mount lenses like a 24-70 or a 70-200. Like, I'm not gonna need that tripod mount on my lens adapter. So moving on from the lens adapter, I'm shooting primarily when I photograph birds. I want to be able to get as close as possible. Granted, sometimes I want an environmental shot, but this lens still gives me the opportunity to do that. It is a Nikon 200-500mm lens f5.6. I can't say enough great things about this. I have had this lens ever since my first beginner DSLR camera, which was a Nikon D3500, and that camera is like obviously nothing compared to the Z9, and this lens was still just phenomenal with that camera body. I've also heard really great things about the Tamron 150-600. However, I have found in my own personal research and studies that the 150-600 just isn't as sharp as the 200-500. So if I had to pick a lens, I would definitely recommend the 200-500 Nikon. I've also worked with the 200-500. I think it was a Sigma lens, but it could have been Tamron. I can't remember. It wasn't great. I actually hated that lens. I had it a little bit before I had this one, and I was smart and I bought it from KEH because I was like, I might not like this lens, and I didn't. And so I actually returned it within like the 30-day return policy or something like that. It might be 60 days. I only had that lens for like a week, decided I didn't like it, and I ended up getting the 200-500 instead, and I've had no regrets. I've never looked back. This lens is truly phenomenal for bird photography. It gives you the perfect focal length of 500mm. It's great, especially for birds, because you don't have to worry about being too far away from them like you do other wildlife. They're not going to be as skittish as like a deer or a bear or an elk or any other larger animal that you may photograph. So if you're looking for just birds, this lens is perfect. Of course, I also use it for wildlife, but you know, I'm stingy. I want a little bit more reach, so I still want that 800mm. But all in all, if you're looking for like an affordable option that's going to be great for the job, I highly recommend the Nikkor 200-500mm f5.6. So there's much more to gear than just, you know, having a great looking camera body and a lens. Something that I cannot stress the importance of is a great tripod. So I am actually currently using the Xiaomi M6 tripod, which I believe is actually discontinued. I was sent this tripod as a sponsorship from Xiaomi, and I've used it ever since, and I've never really looked into getting another tripod because this one is truly durable. It's a fantastic tripod. I'm sure you can still find them online, even though they probably are discontinued. It's very durable. I've used this tripod for 2 or 3 years. It's getting to the point where I may start looking for an upgrade here soon, but I mean, it supports my heavy-duty Nikon Z9 and the biggest lens I have. But in part, it can support all that weight thanks to this phenomenal tripod head. This is considered to be a wildlife gimbal, which, you know, just screws on where a ball head on your tripod would normally go. This is a newer version of this. When I got this wildlife gimbal, I think it was about $70. I think it's more expensive than that now, but I think that's also because the newer version of a wildlife gimbal has been discontinued, which is unfortunate because $70 for something like this is actually very affordable. It may sound expensive if you've not really gotten into photography, but for such a great gimbal like this, it's very affordable. It moves up and down with your camera, and then it also rotates with it. I've never had any problems with this gimbal. It's obviously not the best on the market. Like, you can find better, but for the price point, It's a very nice gimbal and I love it. So now we're going to be getting into the tips and tricks portion of bird photography, because all of this gear, it's not going to matter one bit if you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to use it and get close to the animals. So the first tip that I'm going to give you is to know your subject. That sounds so cliche, and I know if you follow me on Instagram, on TikTok, or honestly if you've watched my YouTube videos before, you know I say that all the time, but I just can't begin to stress how important it is to know and understand the subject that you're photographing. You know, it's important not just for you so you can get good pictures of the animal, but it's also important for the animal because it keeps them safe, you know, and it keeps them healthy and it keeps them comfortable. Because an animal could be out feeding, just like the only time of day they may feed. You may see a cardinal and it may be getting food, or it may be searching for a mate, or it may be doing something that you don't need to disturb it in, you know. And if you get out there and you walk like 5 feet from that cardinal, it's gonna fly away, and you could ruin the one opportunity that that cardinal had to get food that day. And that sucks for you because, one, you didn't get a good shot of the cardinal because it flew away, and two, it sucks for the cardinal because it's not gonna get food that day, and now it might not be able to find food tomorrow, and it could starve and die, and that's your fault, that's on you. So know your subject. Kind of going along with that, it's going to be easier to approach birds in the wild if you blend in with your environment. For me, that requires camo, and it's just pretty much regular camo for me, you know, brown and green sort of sticks, and it just leaves and stuff blended in with it, which is like the standard camo for most people. But if you live in like an environment where you get a lot of snow, you probably want to look into Arctic camo. You know, they also have like snow on some, and I mean, I can buy camo like that where I live as well, but I don't really get enough snow to have to worry about it that much. But if you do live in a snowy environment, you definitely want to invest in that, because I cannot stress how important it is to blend in with your environment. So moving on from those tips, my next tip is to learn how to adjust the settings on your camera. If you don't understand the exposure triangle, you need to understand that. Two YouTubers that I follow that are very educational and have helped me a lot in my career are Tony and Chelsea Northrup. They both, they're husband and wife, and they have great videos on their channel that explains how to change your camera settings, and they even have tutorials for a lot of cameras up on their channel. So you may even be able to find a tutorial for the camera that you're using that would help you improve your photography. I personally shoot in manual mode. A lot of the times with the Z9, I'm comfortable using auto ISO, but sometimes I have to shoot manual ISO. So basically, I'm always changing my shutter speed, my aperture, as well as my ISO, which controls the final outlook of your image, whether it's too bright, too dark, or just right. So it's very important to understand the exposure triangle, which is made up, once again, by shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Shutter speed, when you're looking at your camera, is f-stop. No, no. I take that back. Shutter speed when you're looking at your camera is going to be the fraction, so like 1/200. Aperture is going to be like f/5.6, f/8, f/11. Just disregard that first thing I said. I know what I'm doing, I swear. I got confused because I was blabbering, and here we go again. So let's get into the next tip. So the next tip I have is think about your composition. A popular rule that I give to beginners, and I still even use this rule a lot in my images. However, I have gotten to the point where I feel comfortable breaking the rule, and it's going to take you a little bit to get there. I recommend learning and mastering this rule before you would start to break it, and that's the rule of thirds. Basically, there are 3 vertical lines and 3 horizontal lines that run through your image, and you can just sort of imagine this on your camera LCD screen or your viewfinder now, because mirrorless is amazing with electronic viewfinders. Or you can actually go in and you can choose to have the grid, and if you have the grid, that's very helpful, especially for a beginner. I've gotten to the point in my career where I don't really have to use the grid anymore, and it sort of like stops me from being able to see things in the composition that I want to see. But when I first started out, I always had the grid on my camera on. The rule is generally to place your subject on one of those lines, and I actually think I said there's 3 lines, vertical and horizontal. That's not right. There's 2 lines vertical and 2 lines horizontal. There's 3 boxes in all of those, and generally a good rule of thumb is to place your subject on where those lines intersect, or at least on one of those lines, so your subject isn't centered in the frame. A lot of times people get into bird photography, and when you look at their picture, the bird is dead center in the frame, and that's just not the best look. It looks best to have it off-centered, and you know, there's a lot of different rules that kind of go along with that. I talk about this more in depth in my wildlife photography video if you're interested in checking that out. It's an hour-long tutorial on how to photograph wildlife, and I also talk a lot about bird photography in that video. So just click right up here if you're interested in checking that out. So the final tip that I want to give you today is tell a story. And this is very challenging to do when photographing birds, and even I still struggle doing this. It is very hard to tell a story when photographing a bird. It's hard to tell a story when photographing anything, even people. But once you learn to sort of tell a story and capture that emotion and expression in a bird's face, or capture an interaction with a bird and another animal, or a bird and another bird, or a bird grabbing a bug or grabbing a fish or whatever, I mean, it makes your images that much better. And when you finally learn to tell a story, which is not going to come naturally, it takes years of experience to master. Like I said, I'm still learning how to do this, and I've been photographing birds for probably, I mean, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years I've been photographing birds, and it's still hard to do. You know, it just takes years of experience. So don't, you know, get sad, don't get down and out if you go out in the field, don't get discouraged if you go out in the field and you can't tell a story. You know, just take things one step at a time. You're not going to learn everything at once. You know, learn the exposure triangle, then learn about composition, then learn how to tell a story, learn how to use your gear, learn how to blend in with your environment. You know, tell a story is very far down on the list. It's going to make your images look better than ever, but you have a lot of things to learn before telling a story. But once you do get to the point where you're telling stories with your photos, that's when I want to see your pictures. So, you know, shoot me a DM over on Instagram. I'd love to see it. So all in all, that is all I have for today in this video. I hope that you've learned a lot about the way that I photograph birds. I hope you've enjoyed looking at my gear and my setup for bird photography. I truly love the Z9 and just Nikon and their whole lineup so much in general. I'm not endorsed by Nikon. I'm not a Nikon ambassador. I'm not sponsored by Nikon. I just love their stuff that much, and I highly recommend shooting with Nikon. I hope that you've also enjoyed the tips and tricks that I've talked about. Like I said, don't try to do everything at once. You know, take things one step at a time. Like even for the exposure triangle, don't try to learn ISO, aperture, and shutter speed all at the same time. Pick one, master it, then move on to the next. If you try to do everything at once, it's just gonna make it that much harder for you, and I don't want that. I want you to be successful, and granted, you would eventually become successful. It's just a quicker road to success if you take things one step at a time and really focus on one thing. And that's something that I wish somebody told me sooner in my career. So that's why I'm telling you. So once again, thank you so much for watching this video. I would really appreciate it if you go click on that pinned comment, you know, and check out my new book, To You From Me. Leave a like down below, subscribe if you haven't already. I never tell you all that anymore. I'm just like, oh, they know if they want to subscribe. But like, if you're not and you're watching and you've watched this whole thing, go subscribe. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something today, and that's all I've got for you all. Hope you all have an amazing day.